Calaroga Shark Media. Hi, and welcome to Ghost. This episode is titled PhANTasm.
Ever since the fractures started appearing in the sunroom's southwestern foundation last spring, Walter Piken knew something wasn't quite right within the hollowed innards of his precious home. At first, the hairline crevices spiderwebbing their way across the den's hardwood oak floors seemed little more than the typical settling and expansion murmurs of a nearly century-old timber frame structure. But as the vernal equinox slowly yielded to the sweltering Appalachian summer, Walter couldn't ignore the steadily amplifying refrains of strange scrapings and subterranean scritchings that seemed to echo up from the den at all hours. More disturbingly, a sour, loamy smell had started permeating the entire first floor, as if the fragrant, well-trodden mustiness of the home's storied hardwood furnishings had begun putrefying from some inner miasma. When Walter's oldest friends Marcus and Ray came over for the monthly neighborhood euchre game in late July, both had to stifle their revulsed grimaces behind cupped palms and hesitant cough flurries. "Everything okay down here, Walt?" Marcus finally ventured, gingerly settling into the overstuffed leather armchair that had been the retired bricklayer's seat of choice for the past 30-some-odd years. "The basement leak like crazy over the winter or something?" Walter didn't reply at first. His roomy eyes narrowed, as if trying to discern where precisely the fetid organic tang was originating from. It almost smelled like an animal had crawled off somewhere to bloat and spoil in the dense humidity. "Could be anything with this money pit of a homestead," he finally gruffed, leaning forward to start shuffling and bridging the dog-eared playing cards. "This whole place is one rotten, crooked beam away from caving in on my head at any given minute." As the night wound on and the euchre rounds dissolved into clouds of pungent pipe smoke and reminiscence, Walter made great efforts to steer all conversation away from the increasingly rank, humid ambience. He knew Marcus and Ray meant well, but there was no way a pair of frivolous city boys could ever understand the character demanded of an old home like this. The sounds, smells, all of it was just part of the living, breathing ecosystem when you inhabited a structure literally interwoven with the earth and stones of the surrounding Allegheny forest and hills. But what Walter didn't realize yet was that his faithful den's daily cicada chirrups and acorn bombardments had been subtly usurped by a far more sinister organism. Something that fed, spawned, and metabolized through methods far removed from terrestrial photosynthesis or seed dispersal. Indeed, the great devouring had already begun, deep within the oaken marrows lying just beneath where the old mason had raised so many raucous euchre games, music-filled family Christmas mornings, and contemplative solo evenings with worn, leather-bound tomes and a glass of single malt. The changes started slowly enough at first, a floorboard here and there becoming slightly loose and listing, almost imperceptible at ground level. But it didn't take long before the first jagged-edged breaches began cratering open at various spots across the sunken den's once pristine plankwork. At first, Walter chalked it up to the usual throes of aging home deterioration and set about jimmying loose nails and slathering epoxy wood putty into the dry cracks as he always had. After all, what self-respecting master of a house wouldn't be prepared to battle endemic moisture infiltration, root invasion, and vermin infestations over the long haul? All part of the cycle if you chose to doggedly occupy a manse like this one. What Walter couldn't have foreseen, however, was the true scope of the malign, ravening presence metastasizing within the very foundation trenches and root cellars lying below, nor the sheer primordial hunger that fueled its subterranean peregrinations. It started as nothing more than a handful of indolent incursions from wayward workers, mindlessly tunneling and devouring without sentience or cohesive directive. But with each subsequent regurgitation cycle and pheromone scattering, the feasting colonies rapidly swelled in number, their expansive broods thrashing through the rotted oak. black-capped snouts hungrily swarming over every inch of Walter's decimated den. With each writhing, mandible-riven salvo, more denizens of the home fell before their onslaughts, reduced to chewy, viscera-leached dollops for the great devouring. It's said that on the night of Walter's final stand against their remorseless hunger, hundreds of the gnarled, thorax-bound invaders already thronged in the den's desiccated corners. The old mason only had the presence of mind to let loose a single, strangled shriek of terror, a sound so primal and etched with mortal desperation that it pierced every wasted, chitinous carapace with the tines of its reverberations. But even as his doughy, septuagenarian frame was promptly drowned beneath an advancing, remorseless tsunami of clacking mandibles and shuddering abdomens, Walt Piken's spirit remained defiantly, lucidly aware throughout his entire gruesome deglutition. As his soft tissues were shredded and voided into the countless serrated gullets, Walter's screaming consciousness was severed from the physical husk, though not before registering every last atomic spasm of ravaged agony. It was only later that night, when the clattering, mandible-grinding feeding frenzy finally sated, that an altogether different sort of haunting phenomenon began to transpire throughout the basement corridors and first-floor lounging rooms of Walter's childhood home. An unsettling, low-frequency droning filled the rank, moisture-saturated air like the subsonic ruminations of a partially lobotomized leviathan. Then, the first of many scuttling, irrumpant percussions boomed as if some behemoth buried in the earth was flexing its exoskeletal plates, rending rock and soil with the force of its birthing convulsions. For the next several nights, anyone navigating within a quarter-mile radius of the Piken homestead swore they heard or felt the unmistakable rumblings of earth being upturned, each percussive, tectonic blow preceded by a low, droning resonance. Geologists and oilfield dowsers deployed their most sensitive seismographic gear in attempts to pinpoint the source of the otherworldly tremors, but failed to detect anything beyond the threshold of utterly inexplicable. It wasn't until a sudden violent upheaval ripped open the topographic earth of Walter's wasted den that the source of the unsettling disturbances was revealed in its full, abominable form. What emerged was an insectoid amalgam of such distended, festering mass that it seemed to occupy an entirely separate stratum of the material universe. A towering, chitin-sheathed Goliath with thousands of articulated limb cases rippling and wriggling beneath a hard-shell carapace the size of a light aircraft. The sheer bulk of its legionary thoraxes shuddered and throbbed with ceaseless, chittering peristalsis as miles of desiccated musculature undulated beneath. From its apex knuckled an elephantine, armored cowl that could have withstood the pressures of the Mariana Trench, sweeping outward into ridged, armored phalanges that spanned a dozen yards apiece and culminated in razor-tipped clusters of sickle-scythe appendages. Yet most harrowing of all were the hundreds of crevasse mouths, drooling streams of brackish ichor and butchered carrion scraps from their serrated grinding plates, each weeping from a different position across the amalgam's vast, swollen corpulence. As night watchers from miles around converged on the Piken estate in a trance of morbid fascination and terror, they bore witness to a phantasmagoria of such perverse, multidimensional horror that entire clusters of spectators had to be physically restrained from clawing their own eyes and ears away to escape the unraveling of their perceptual psyches. For scattered throughout the pestilent, roiling mass were flashes of half-congealed humanoid semblance, writhing from within the festering layers of sinew and cartilage, torso spasms and flailing limbs discernible in a contortion of perpetual flaying, slowly compacting into a single, cacophonous torso shape emerging from the heart of the unearthly abomination. At this innermost nexus of twitching, blasted remnants, a face emerged, a visage so scoured with psychic desolation and anguish as to excoriate the astral skein of every mortal who dared meet its hollow, lidless stare of beseechment. It was the mutilated semblance of Walter Piken, the once steadfast heart and spirit of the old family homestead, now trapped in an eternity of roaring, gelatinous torment at the ravenous nucleus of this world-devouring behemoth. As astrophysicists and theoretical metabiologists were hastily drafted in by the National Guard to attempt comprehending this eldritch dimensional incursion, Walter's decapitated likeness rotated amidst the gnarled, pulsing spines of sinew like a splayed astronaut wreathed in gore-crusted shipwreckage. One after another, the old masons gurgled pleas of "See me, see me," sliced through the oppressive groans and insectal drones, as if calling out to any lingering shred of empathy or conscience in the universe. Within days, the US military initiated a series of targeted orbital gamma bombardments, detonating dense radiation pulses directly into the anomaly in hopes of quashing or destabilizing its fractal foothold. But all attempts proved futile against the seething malign hunger catalyzing the colossal creature's ceaseless metastasizing sprawl. Military payloads simply sloughed off the coruscating bioluminescent plates in actinic discharges, seeming to nourish rather than impede the ravenous fiend's geometric birthing contortions. Only when CERN directed their remaining catalytic energies towards generating a microscopic but hyperdensely compacted field of total quantum negation, a literal atomic exclusion zone for space-time itself, did the impossible finally begin to transpire. The singularity wavefront swept through the gargantuan hive mind with the thermonuclear finality of a universe biting itself out of existence, banishing the obscene flesh growth from every last encroachment into rational dimensionality in one incandescent, etheric wail of contracting force vectors. But as the final spasms of rotten, post-biologic matter collapsed inward, one speck of luminous psychic effluence seemed to achieve escape velocity, piercing the containment boundary like a disembodied quasar. When all was silent and the contaminated acres reseeded with electrified vitrification compounds, those investigators who had borne first-hand witness to the vile incursion's unmaking emerged from their spectral, dampening shelters in panicked droves. For in that final moment of entropic reversion, each felt the imprint of Walter's screaming, forgotten soul achieve a singular confluence with their own. An instant of awful reintegration into the undying collective memory of humanity itself. To know themselves, if only for a passing subjective eternity, as the ravenous, unquenchable hunger that has eternally birthed and consumed every last morsel of the cosmos's grand divinity. A singular blight and sacrilege scrawled across the very face of creation itself, the grim primogen of all manifest being. Walter's endless screaming was the universe's own infinite birth pangs of self-immolation, finally made flesh and given voice. And every living thing was now inextricably woven with those reverberations of ceaseless, cyclic hunger and curdled birthing. Its stitches threaded through the quantum skein to imprint upon the very ultrastructure of all that is, was, and ever will be. Each time anyone now ventures too near the perimeter of those ash-seared acres where the Piken house once stood, they cannot stave off a reflexive, existential shudder of dread. The creeping certainty that some macrocosmic splinter of Walter's gnawing, forgotten essence achieved transcendental escape that day. That it now roams, ravenous and insatiate, hungering to be seen once more by the denizens of all possible worlds before reintegrating its infinite, all-consuming recursion.
Ghost is a Calaroga Shark Media production, written and hosted by Alexander Ian McIntyre, produced by Mark Francis, executive producers Mark Francis and John McDermott. Portions of this podcast may have been created with the assistance of AI.
This show, along with hundreds of others from Calaroga Shark Media, is available commercial-free on any player, hassle-free. Just look for the link in the episode or show notes. Ghost now has merch. Find shirts, mugs, and more with the Ghost logo for sale at our merch store. There's free shipping and 10% off now with the coupon NEWMERCH10. Did we say there's free shipping? Check out all the goods at calaroga.com, that's CALOROGA.com, or just look for the link in the show notes. Thanks for supporting the show, we really appreciate it.
Calaroga Shark Media.